Hey everybody, welcome to Spitballin Cards. Today we're going to talk about the Golden at Bat. And if you don't know what that is, you'll want to stay tuned. Here with me today are Chris, baseball card addict on IG, and Filmington. So, Phil, what's the Golden at Bat?
I guess it's this rule where they already use it in the Savannah Bananas League, where you're able to, one time per game, have any offensive player come up to at bat, regardless of what inning it is. You could pick any player, and you can kind of tap that button once per game, which obviously goes very, very against traditional baseball. We've seen a number of rule changes over the years, reducing home plate collisions and making certain slides illegal. You know, how many times you can throw the ball to first base and some of the shifting restrictions, the pitch clock, obviously. I feel like this one would be the most disruptive of all, and it would piss off a large group of people. But I think that Manfred is seeing how much scrutiny he kind of had to deal with already with some of the rule changes that he put into effect. A lot of people saying like this is just going to piss off all of the traditionalists, and I was one person. I was a person that said that I'm a traditionalist, and I'm like, why would you change it? You're just pissing off the people that like baseball genuinely, and you're not going to bring any new attention to the sport because the change isn't significant enough. This one's pretty significant. Now, let's preface this by saying that it's a long way away from happening, and it's more of like just an idea than something that he's really seriously thought about. But why would he float it then? Right? I feel like he is thinking about some drastic changes. So why would he want to do that though? And I think a lot of it has to do with, I'm going to probably piss a lot of people off here, but baseball has improved this year, right? I think attendance is back to 2019 levels. I think shortening the games by 20% or so was a good move. There was a lot of viewership, specifically with the World Series. More than half the viewers coming from Japan. You could see that as a positive or a negative. What's going to happen when Ohtani's not in the World Series? What's going to happen when it's not an all-time matchup, right? We're back to 2019 levels, which is great. But if you extend the metrics like back to 2005, 2000, early 90s, and if you look at viewership is tough because you have streaming now. So you can really only look at like the last few years to get apples to apples. But attendance has suffered, and we're still like far below in 2024. We're still far below the levels of like 2005, 2010, 2015 even. I think that Manfred is trying to rewrite his legacy a little bit of being a shitty president of baseball or whatever he is, commissioner. And I think he's willing to throw another curveball, like do something crazy and see what happens. And we can talk a little bit more about the effects of what this would cause, because I think it would be interesting. It certainly would. If you're just to accept that it happens and like understand that you can't fight it. And if he just did it, like think about the positives, think about the changes and not just like the negatives and how baseball would be horrible to watch and how you'd stop going to games or whatever. Like there are some positives. There are some interesting things that I think it would create. You guys, what do you think?
Oh God, I hate it. I hate the idea of it. But what I actually thought when I first heard it is like he's planning something else, but this leaked out, so people get really outraged about it because it's a stupid, horrible idea. But then when he makes the change he actually wants to make, be like, well, we didn't do the golden rule thing, the golden at bat rule. So that concerns me. Like I'm wondering what actual change is coming. I refuse to believe this was actually seriously considered at any level, because it just doesn't make any sense. You'd have to come up with like all these little side rules. Like if the player's on base, they can't possibly be used, because are we actually going to use like a pinch runner, like a ghost runner, like a literal ghost runner in a baseball game? I have a hard time seeing this isn't softball. So I don't know. I don't think it was ever being seriously considered, but it is possible that he does want to make his mark, and he was floating this out there to see what kind of reactions it would get to, potentially, I don't know, portend something, something dangerous that he might want to do. I don't know. I love the pitch clock.
There's a lot of implications to it. I don't know. You mentioned a couple there, but how the players union would feel about that. What if the player had just batted? Can they bat again? Is that a worry about their health if they have two at bats in a row? Yeah, I can't see it really happening. Phil mentioned a lot of the rule changes, which at the beginning I was against most of them, being more of a traditionalist myself, but I feel like they've done well. The time batters were taking between at bats and walking out of the box was just getting really ridiculous. So the pitch clock, I feel like, has had a positive effect. A couple changes that I feel like they're affecting the numbers of baseball, the history of baseball more. I miss extra inning games because now they're mostly pretty short. Most games end in the 10th or 11th of extra innings because they put the guy in second base. So there's players that are getting less at bats, less opportunities over the course of a season. That's affecting some of the numbers. But I think something like this would be a much more drastic effect, especially if it could be done every game. You would think that the superstars of baseball would get a lot more at bats. How many times would you see Soto and Ohtani? And from that aspect, it would be fun as a viewer to watch. But how much does that skew their historical stats as well? So I can't really see them going down that path, like you both have mentioned. Manfred, even the fact that he's talking about it shows that he's willing to do something serious. I feel like baseball has more pressing problems with their economic situation. We've talked about a little bit on this channel, just the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. And every year, the free agency, you have to wait for the top teams to pick their players that they're going to pay, and then it trickles down to the smaller market teams. So I feel like eventually, if that gap keeps getting wider, there is going to be something substantial that'll have to change with the game of baseball. And I don't know if that's changing into 2 leagues or multiple leagues where you have a league that can spend $500 million on their salary and one that spends $50 million on their salary. I don't know. So I feel like there will be some drastic baseball changes coming. The changes to the actual rules of the game, I feel like that's not doing anything for it.
Yeah, I think the what's it called, the Premier League and the Champions League, I think that's feeling more and more inevitable every year that we go by. It just seems more and more likely that we're going to get something like that, like one league of 12 and then a league underneath it with 18 teams. Like, this can't survive. And the ridiculous like stats about, well, there's parity because a different team has been winning the World Series. Like, no, we know who at least 8 of the 12 playoff teams are going to be every single year before we throw a single pitch. And that's just based on salary. So it is insane, by the way, that we now have an American baseball player has a bigger contract than any European soccer player. That is nuts. And that has to say something about the strength of or popularity of baseball, because soccer or football in Europe is like, it feels like it's more popular than baseball is here.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we now have one contract that is bigger than anything over there. Maybe that just means that there's 1 or 2 ridiculously wealthy baseball owners, but I don't know. I think that's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to like the power divide between players and the organizations. The owners in the NFL have a lot more power versus the players themselves. There's not as much, guaranteed money, if any, in a lot of cases. And that could have something to do with like the higher salaries in baseball, the strength of the player union, just the way it's like set up more than it does like, oh, baseball's like 2x more popular than this sport or whatever, based on some of the median salaries and whatever, which are probably also pretty high compared to other sports. Yeah. So if they were, I do think there's at least a 1% chance that he implements this or tries to implement some form of this golden at bat rule. And if he was to do that, what is he looking to do? Like, I think one of the flaws or maybe weaknesses of baseball versus other sports is that the star players don't get elevated enough. The marketing of the star players, for whatever reason, you don't see as many like reels on TikTok or whatever. Some of that could just have to do with interest in the sport. But I think baseball does take some onus of like the marketing just isn't as good as other sports. There's other stuff they could do. I don't know what those things are. But if you start to make each of those star players more, giving them more opportunity to shine and like disproportionate higher opportunity than the rest of the teams, so it's not distributed equally like it usually is, where a guy really is like 9% of his offense every night, right? You've got certain guys that will, based on their place in the order, have maybe one more plate appearance, but usually it's pretty even versus other sports where you've got LeBron James, he's got the ball more, especially in his prime. Tom Brady has more of an impact. You've got star receivers in the NFL that are getting 15 or 16 targets versus other ones. Like there's more like disproportionate opportunities. So with higher opportunities for certain players, you have more accountability for that impact. So all of a sudden it's this person's fault or this person is clutch. And we could argue about whether clutch is like a real skill or not, but that would get more recognized. And then I think about the playoffs, right? Today, you know, it's a crapshoot, small sample sizes. You still have that with the playoffs, even with this, I want to call it a golden banana rule. You still have that. But then certain players get blamed for losing even more than they did in like the Mike Trout era where he wasn't making the playoffs. Oh, it's his fault. Like then it becomes a reality. Then it's like, well, this guy had a chance. Aaron Judge really like hurt his team versus this player, or this player is so clutch. I feel like playoffs would then get more recognized and they would get linked to a player's legacy and it would help their hobby values is what I'm saying. Like, and we as collectors, we would be more interested in playoff outcomes. We'd be more interested in who won the playoffs or who had the best moments in the playoffs. You'd have to seriously look at those statistics if like the star players got more bats than others. And then you're dealing with more sample size too from those stars. Does that make sense? Or am I kind of going crazy here?
No, it does. Baseball is a kind of a beautiful and unique game like that. And that like you were saying, like in football, like if the Chiefs are going to win, like the ball's in Patrick Mahomes' hands. Like it's going to be largely up to him. He'll have an opportunity to win the game. In baseball, like there's no guarantee. You might not get up. And if you do, you can just get walked. And like, that's kind of what a thing that separates baseball, from other sports. It's like, if Argentina wants to wants to win a shootout, Messi's going to get a shot. But in baseball, like Aaron Judge can't win the game if he doesn't get up. Other players have to.
Get him, Chris, you bring up an interesting point. What if they decide to walk the person with the golden at bat? Are they going to say you can't walk them? Well, again, they can pitch around them. I mean, then you lose the golden at bat.
Jeff, do you remember? So Jeff and I we used to play in a softball league in Burbank, and their tiebreak rule, they call it a California tiebreaker, and it's just a total number of bases that you can pick any three batters. And it's a total number of bases that any three batters can get. But they can refuse walks. So like for example, if we're up by 2 bases and the last batter is up, if I'm pitching, I just walk him, and that's 1 base and we win. But the batter can just be like, no, I'm not accepting the walk. And that was their original rule. And there was a game where the pitcher walked the batter. It was something like 21 consecutive times. And the guy wasn't going to swing at a bad pitch, and the pitcher wasn't going to throw him a strike. And I think the umpire eventually just forfeited the game because he couldn't stand there. He was like, it was like 11:15 at night. The lights were going to go off. He's like, throw a strike or we're going home. And we don't want baseball to get obviously to that point, but that was a pretty entertaining story to hear about in the softball world. Just like stubbornness times a million.
Yeah, and I think something like that would definitely happen with this, because how could you legislate that? How could you legislate that you've got to throw this guy a strike?
Like, no, you just put him on every single time.
Yeah. There's probably answers to all of those questions, and like regarding stats and the history and rule books and like looking back and comparing like this season versus other ones. Fortunately, we have WAR, which can find a way to account for this rule. It can. There's a way it can. All the other stats, like I don't know what you do with. You have the pre this era, post this era. Maybe it doesn't work out. It doesn't draw in additional fans, and you just scrap it after a year or two. Try something else. But I think he's willing to do something bold. I don't know if this is the thing, but it would be interesting, like having playoff outcomes. Like we watch the playoffs because we're fans of those teams, but like truly those games having an impact on the players' cards being like long lasting versus something that's just like a temporary thing and you just, sell the hype or whatever. This would be like really beneficial to their legacy if they had more accountability and if they got bumped up and they got walked or whatever. Like maybe you've got some lineup protection for that player or something. It would be interesting, and maybe it wouldn't like be the worst thing in the world. And I'm just saying that because some of these other changes I've lived through and I've been like, oh, I actually liked him after the fact. And I think you guys are in the same boat. This one's really crazy, but I don't think he's just saying it just to say it.
No, I hope he is. But you think about like how the World Series ended, right? I think it was like was it Volpe, Wells, and Verdugo making the last 3 outs for the Yankees? And obviously, they would love to have pretty much any other 3 hitters up there in those opportunities. So I'm sure they would love to just plug Aaron Judge in, like to lead off that inning.
Yeah, you're only doing it once, so you're not
Right,
shaking things up too much. It's not like you're doing it every inning. That would be a little wacky. Every inning,
that's too much.
You look out like
if you get once a game, think about during the year, like Ohtani could have got 150 more at bats. What could you have done with that?
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. So yeah, those counting stats, you can't. I mean, in long term, especially like career long, like that's really weird to think about. WAR, fortunately, can adjust for anything. There's just 2 calculations that need to figure it out at this point. I look at pitchers and why they're not collected in the hobby. And a lot of it has to do with the higher risk of getting injured and just being good for a long period of time. Like there's so much variation there. But I think some of it also has to do with them showing up for 6 innings in every 5th day, right? There's just, you're not, how can you be connected to a pitcher? How can you want to collect a pitcher that just isn't playing that much? So that kind of goes to the point, not saying that like pitchers get changed by this. That's just an example of like, you don't get to see the star players enough to be connected to them in baseball. That's an issue, right?
And I bet that's what Manfred's looking at the other sports with. Yeah, and you've said it repeatedly, Phil, talking about the equal opportunities that baseball players have versus the other sports. And I'm sure he is looking at the ratings for basketball, especially once you get to the playoffs, and football anytime, and you have those star players and they're going to be handling the ball at crunch time. So yeah, I'm sure he is looking at that and figuring out from a marketing perspective, from a ratings perspective, how could we incorporate that into baseball? And because of the way the game is set up to provide everybody to have an equal opportunity, there's really no way to do it. So yeah, there would have to be some sort of change like this made.
Yeah, can you imagine a situation where like a relief pitcher like strikes out Ohtani with the bases loaded, and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm almost." And that's the second out. He's like, "I'm almost out of it." And they're like, "No, Ohtani, go bat again. Go get him. See if you can strike him out a second time." I mean, it would be exciting, cool. I guess, but it
would make for exciting stuff. Like think about how the World Baseball Classic ended. Just happened to be perfect ending with Ohtani against Trout, right?
Well, almost perfect. I mean, depending on your point of view.
Yeah, but how just that they matched up.
Yeah,
that they matched up perfectly there by chance. And yes, if you could simulate that, ending the World Series, making sure your best pitcher goes against the other team's best hitter. I don't know. Yeah, it's a fun mental exercise, I guess.
Yes,
there's some strategy there.
Yeah, there are already some stats that there's very small sample sizes, but for sure players are getting some cheap runs by being that extra ghost runner and extra innings, like just starting an inning at second base. I actually lost a fantasy matchup last year. The Sunday night game was an extra innings, and I forget who it was, but we only had one. My opponent had one guy playing. He made the last out in the 9th inning, and I'm like, oh, well, he's probably done. Yeah, and there he is on second base in the 10th, scoring on like 2 ground balls. And
right, they make an out, and then they get rewarded by getting a run. It's crazy.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't want to see this happen. I do admit it could be exciting, but I do not want to see it happen. Despite that fantasy loss, I like that rule now. I think it's similar to like a shootout in soccer. Like you have to be able to manufacture. You have to be able to do the little things to win this game. And obviously watching my pathetic Braves last year go up there just swinging wildly 9 times and strike out every extra inning game was a little bit brutal, but I kind of like that aspect of the game now.
And it does help from a viewership perspective because 90% of the games are going to end in the next 1 or 2 innings. They're not going to go 12, 13, 14 innings. There's going to be something happening. So you want to see what happens in those extra innings. So I could see, from that perspective.
Yeah. Baseball is resilient enough to be able to handle a lot of these changes. And before they happen, there's all these questions like, what if this, what if that, what if this? Like, it's like in 1999, we were going to year 2000 and it was people are asking, oh, what do we call the years now? Do we say, do we say 2000? It just happens. People figure it out. It's going to work out. Stop thinking about the past and the transition. If you just think forward about maybe improving the game, something like this, I don't know. Like, I don't know how disruptive it ends up being after talking through it. You use it once, the moment where Ohtani is facing that relief pitcher, they probably already used that card earlier in the game when they had the bases loaded with 1 out. and they probably blew it. It's kind of like the instant replay, the review.
Yeah.
If you get it wrong, right, you lose it, or do you only get one per game? I forget how it works, but there's strategy there, right? It won't be as impactful just that one.
It makes like a top heavy roster. Like, let's just look at the Yankee lineup, for example. I'll just continue shitting on the Yankees because it's fun. Like, they have one legit hitter in their lineup. Like, if they're playing a team like the Brewers probably think if we just manage Aaron Judge, like, we're going to be okay. But now we have to manage Aaron Judge an extra time. Like, in the game, it just kind of, I don't know. I don't know. I'll just trail off.
All right. Well, let us know in the comments what you think about this golden at bat rule, how you feel about rule changes in general in baseball. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about in this arena as it gets closer to the season. We see about any new rule changes that MLB is going to implement. But
wait, hold on. Before we finish, Jeff, quick question. Do we adjust the pitcher? If the pitcher, say the guy, the golden rule, he gets a double or knocks in some runs, do we adjust the ERA at all? Or does the pitcher ERA stat just stay the same, even though he's now facing like a different type of lineup? Like, instead of he's gone through the lineup 3 times, but he had to face their best hitter 4 times. So he gave up an extra run. Like,
I think he's got to suck it up and take it.
You got to suck it up. You added the DH to the National League and they didn't adjust the ERA. So again, back to war.
And we have ERA plus, I guess, to sort of, level that off. All right. Yeah. Sorry. I was just thinking out loud.
A lot of good questions, a lot of things to work out if they would implement this, but it's only a distant dream for now. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another edition of Spitballin Cards. If you missed Scott and Ty, they will be back soon. Thanks everybody for joining. See ya.
Dude, let's do it. I kind of want it now.
Yeah, that was more interesting. That conversation was more interesting than I thought it was.
Yes, I was not expecting it to go that way, but I enjoyed it.
Almost sold me on it,
Thinking about it.
The more I think about it, the more I think it's a real idea.